The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as King Charles III sat in his private study, sorting through the daily correspondence that arrived in endless streams. Letters from world leaders, invitations to state functions, and countless requests from charities filled his mahogany desk. But among the formal envelopes bearing official seals, one simple, white envelope caught his attention. The handwriting was familiar, delicate yet determined, written in the distinctive style he had come to recognize over the years. The envelope bore no royal insignia, no official markings that would typically accompany correspondence to the monarch. Instead, it carried only his name written in elegant script, His Majesty King Charles III. What made his hands tremble slightly as he held the letter was not its simplicity, but the postmark date that seemed impossible. The letter had been sent 3 days after Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, had mysteriously vanished without a trace. Charles remembered that terrible morning 6 days ago, when William had burst into the palace, his face pale with panic, and his voice breaking as he spoke the words that would haunt them all. Kate was gone. Her security detail had found her car abandoned on a remote country road in Norfolk, keys still in the ignition, her phone left on the passenger seat. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no explanation for why the future Queen of England would simply disappear into thin air. The search had begun immediately. Police helicopters circled overhead while K-9 units combed through miles of countryside. The media had been kept at bay with carefully crafted statements about the princess, taking time for personal reflection. But behind closed doors, the royal family was consumed with worry. William had barely slept, spending his days coordinating with investigators and his nights staring at photographs of Kate, searching for clues they might have missed. Now, holding this impossible letter, Charles felt a chill run down his spine. The Postal Service confirmed the date stamp was genuine. Security had verified that the letter had passed through normal channels. Yet logic dictated that Kate could not have sent this letter 3 days after she disappeared, unless something extraordinary had occurred that no one yet understood. With careful reverence, Charles broke the wax seal that bore Kate's personal insignia. The letter was written on her personal stationery, the same cream-colored paper she used for her private correspondence. As his eyes moved across the first lines, he realized this was no ordinary message. Kate had written with the weight of someone who knew their time was limited, choosing each word with deliberate care. Your Majesty, the letter began, if you are reading this, then the events I have long feared have finally come to pass. I write to you not as the Princess of Wales, but as a woman who has discovered truths that threaten the very foundation of what we hold dear. The crown, our family, and the future of the monarchy hang in the balance of secrets that have remained buried for too long. Charles paused, his heart pounding as he absorbed the gravity of her words. Kate had always been the picture of composure, the steady presence who brought stability to William's sometimes turbulent emotions. She approached royal duties with grace and intelligence, never one to dramatize or exaggerate. If she spoke of threats to the crown, then something truly serious had transpired. The letter continued, describing events that had begun 3 months earlier when Kate received an anonymous package at Kensington Palace. Inside had been a collection of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be official correspondence dating back decades. The materials told a story that Kate initially dismissed as elaborate forgery. But as she began to investigate quietly, she discovered authentication marks and corroborating evidence that suggested the documents were genuine. According to Kate's letter, the documents revealed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and the royal household itself. Financial irregularities, secret agreements with foreign governments, and evidence of decisions made that directly contradicted the constitutional role of the monarchy. Kate had spent weeks verifying the information, using her access to palace records and her network of trusted contacts in various government departments. What she found had shaken her to her core. The documents suggested that certain members of the establishment had been using royal influence for personal gain, making decisions that served private interests rather than the British people. More disturbing still were indications that these activities had been ongoing for years, carefully concealed beneath layers of bureaucracy and royal protocol. Kate wrote that she had initially intended to bring her findings directly to Charles, but had been warned through intermediary channels that her investigation had been discovered. Anonymous phone calls had begun arriving at Kensington Palace, messages that were never threatening but carried clear implications. She was told to cease her inquiries and forget what she had learned for the sake of her family's safety and the stability of the crown. "I cannot, in good conscience, ignore what I have discovered," Kate wrote. "The British people deserve to know when their trust has been betrayed, and the monarchy deserves to be cleansed of those who would use it for corrupt purposes. But I also cannot ignore the very real dangers that my knowledge has created, not just for myself, but for William and our children." The letter detailed Kate's growing realization that she was being watched. Cars that seemed to follow her route when she traveled alone, new staff members at the palace whose backgrounds couldn't be fully verified, and subtle changes in her daily routine that others had implemented without her input. She had begun to feel like a prisoner in her own life, surrounded by people she could no longer fully trust. Charles found himself gripping the letter tighter as he read Kate's description of her final days at the palace. She had made the difficult decision to distance herself from the evidence she had gathered, hiding copies in secure locations, and entrusting others with pieces of information that could be assembled if something happened to her. She had also made plans for her disappearance, knowing that it might be the only way to protect her family while ensuring that the truth would eventually come to light. "I do not write this to cause you pain, Your Majesty, but because I believe you are one of the few people who values the integrity of the crown above all else," Kate continued. "You have dedicated your life to service and duty, and I know that you want to know if that service was being undermined by those who should be protecting it." The letter went on to describe specific locations where Kate had hidden documentation that would support her claims. She provided names of individuals she trusted who could verify her findings and detailed instructions for how the information should be handled to minimize damage to the monarchy while ensuring accountability for those involved in wrongdoing. What struck Charles most powerfully was Kate's tone throughout the letter. Despite the serious allegations and the personal danger she described, her words carried no bitterness or accusation toward the royal family itself. Instead, she wrote with deep love for the institution and genuine concern for its future. She spoke of William with tender affection, expressing her heartbreak at the pain her disappearance would cause him, but explaining that she saw no other way to protect both her family and the truth. "I have tried to find another path," she wrote, "but every option I considered either put my family at greater risk or allowed the corruption to continue unchallenged. By removing myself from a situation, I hope to create space for the truth to emerge while keeping those I love safe from immediate harm." As Charles reached the end of the first page, he realized that Kate had orchestrated her own disappearance as a carefully calculated move in a much larger game. She hadn't been kidnapped or suffered some tragic accident. She had made the extraordinary decision to leave everything behind because she believed it was the only way to expose corruption that threatened the very institution she had sworn to serve. The implications were staggering. If Kate's allegations were true, then there were people within the establishment who would go to great lengths to protect their secrets. Her disappearance would have created confusion and diverted attention from their activities, but it would also have started a countdown. Eventually, when this letter arrived and her hidden evidence was discovered, the truth would begin to emerge. Charles looked up from the letter, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. The search for Kate had been conducted under the assumption that she was in danger and needed to be found quickly. But what if she was safe, hidden somewhere while waiting for this letter to trigger the next phase of her plan? What if every day the family spent searching and worrying was part of a larger strategy to expose those who had threatened her? He thought about William's anguish over the past week, the barely controlled panic in his son's eyes as he coordinated with investigators and issued public appeals for information. William had no idea that his wife's disappearance might be voluntary, that she might be watching from a distance as events unfolded according to her design. The knowledge felt like both a relief and an additional burden. Kate might be safe, but she was also asking Charles to make decisions that could reshape the monarchy forever. The letter had more pages, and Charles knew that each one would likely contain information that would be more difficult to process than the last. Kate had never been one to act impulsively, and if she had gone to these extraordinary lengths, then the evidence she had discovered must be compelling indeed. The question now was whether Charles was prepared to act on that evidence, knowing that it might bring down people he had trusted for years and create a scandal that could damage the crown's reputation for generations. As he prepared to turn to the second page, Charles thought about the oath he had taken when he became king. He had promised to serve his people with integrity and to uphold the values that the monarchy represented. If Kate was right, then fulfilling that oath might require him to take actions that would be more difficult and dangerous than anything he had faced in his long preparation for the throne. The morning sun had shifted, casting different shadows across his study as Charles realized that the next few hours might determine not just Kate's fate, but the future of the British monarchy itself. The letter in his hands was more than correspondence from a missing family member. It was a call to action that would test everything he believed about duty, family, and the institution he had devoted his life to serving. Charles turned to the second page of Kate's letter with trembling fingers, knowing that whatever revelations awaited him would change everything. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows of his study seemed dimmer now, as if the very atmosphere had shifted with the weight of the secrets he was about to uncover. Kate's handwriting continued with the same careful precision, but Charles could sense an urgency in the way certain words were emphasized, underlined with the pressure of someone who knew their time was running out. The second page began with specific names, dates, and amounts that made Charles's blood run cold as he recognized several individuals he had considered trusted advisors and longtime servants of the crown. The documents I discovered detail a network of financial arrangements that span over 15 years, Kate wrote. Lord Harrison, whom you appointed as your senior financial advisor just last year, has been channeling royal investment funds through offshore accounts that benefit a consortium of private investors. The amounts involved total over £47 million, money that was designated for charitable foundations and public welfare programs. Charles had to read the paragraph twice before the full implications sank in. Lord Harrison had come to him with impeccable credentials and recommendations from the highest levels of government. Charles had trusted him with oversight of some of the crown's most significant financial decisions. If Kate's allegations were accurate, then Harrison had been stealing from the very charities and programs that the royal family championed publicly. The letter continued with meticulous detail about how the scheme operated. Harrison had created a complex web of shell companies and investment vehicles that appeared legitimate on the surface, but served to redirect funds away from their intended purposes. The stolen money was then distributed among a network of conspirators that included members of Parliament, high-ranking civil servants, and even some individuals within the palace staff itself. What made the conspiracy particularly insidious was how carefully it had been designed to avoid detection. The amounts taken from each fund were small enough to appear as normal administrative costs or investment fees. The diversion of funds happened gradually over time, making it nearly impossible to detect without access to records from multiple institutions. Kate had only uncovered the pattern by comparing documents from different sources and noticing discrepancies that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively revealed a systematic theft. I traced the flow of funds through 17 different financial institutions, Kate wrote. The money has been used to purchase properties, fund private business ventures, and even influence political decisions that benefit the conspirators' other interests. They have essentially been using the crown as their personal bank while maintaining the appearance of dedicated public service. Charles felt physically ill as he read Kate's account of how deep the corruption ran. She had discovered that some of the social programs he personally supported Initiatives he believed were making a real difference in people's lives had been deliberately underfunded because millions of pounds designated for their support had been diverted into private pockets. Children's hospitals, housing projects for the elderly, and educational programs for disadvantaged youth had all suffered because of this systematic theft. But the financial corruption was only part of the story Kate had uncovered. The letter went on to describe how the same network had been using their positions to influence royal appointments and policy decisions. They had recommended people for sensitive positions based not on merit, but on their willingness to participate in or overlook corrupt activities. They had shaped the king's schedule and access to information in ways that served their interests rather than the public good. They have been controlling the narrative around the monarchy for years, Kate explained. Press releases, public statements, even the charities we choose to support have been influenced by their agenda. They present you with information that supports their goals while filtering out anything that might expose their activities or contradict their interests. Kate described how she had begun to notice these patterns during her regular royal duties. Certain topics were consistently avoided in briefings, specific journalists were favored over others for royal access, and charitable organizations with questionable practices received royal patronage, while more deserving causes were overlooked. Initially, she had attributed these patterns to the complex politics of royal protocol, but her investigation revealed that they were the result of deliberate manipulation by people who were supposed to be serving the crown. The most disturbing revelation in Kate's letter concerned the methods used to maintain secrecy and silence potential whistleblowers. She had discovered records of private investigators being hired to monitor royal family members, staff, and even journalists who might pose a threat to the conspiracy. These investigators had compiled detailed files on people's personal lives, looking for information that could be used for blackmail or intimidation if necessary. They know everything about everyone, Kate wrote. Personal financial problems, family difficulties, private indiscretions that people would prefer to keep secret. This information gives them tremendous power over individuals who might otherwise speak out about what they have witnessed. People stay silent not because they approve of what is happening, but because they fear the consequences of speaking up. Kate revealed that she had herself become a target of this surveillance once her investigation began to uncover sensitive information. Her phone calls were monitored, her internet activity was tracked, and people close to her were approached with subtle inquiries about her activities and interests. The message was clear. She was being watched, and her continued investigation would have consequences not just for herself, but for her family. I found listening devices in my private study at Kensington Palace, Kate wrote, her handwriting showing signs of stress as she recalled the discovery. My personal correspondence was being intercepted and read before it reached its intended recipients. Even my conversations with William were being monitored, which meant that anything I shared with him about my discoveries could potentially put him in danger as well. The realization that her own home had been compromised had been a turning point for Kate. She understood that she could no longer conduct her investigation safely from within the normal royal environment. Every step she took was being watched and analyzed by people who had the power to make her disappear if she became too much of a threat to their operation. Kate described the careful planning that had gone into her disappearance. She had spent weeks establishing a secure communication network with trusted individuals outside the royal household, people who could help her continue her investigation from a safe distance. She had arranged for copies of critical documents to be stored in multiple secure locations, ensuring that the evidence would survive even if something happened to her. I created false leads about my emotional state and possible mental health concerns, Kate admitted in the letter. I allowed certain people to believe that the pressures of royal life were affecting me psychologically, knowing that this would provide a plausible explanation for erratic behavior when I finally disappeared. It broke my heart to let people think I was struggling mentally, but it was necessary to protect the real reason for my actions. Charles realized that Kate's apparent withdrawal from public duties in the weeks before her disappearance, which the family had attributed to stress and fatigue, had actually been part of her elaborate plan. She had been preparing for the moment when she would need to vanish completely, laying groundwork that would allow her to investigate safely while keeping suspicion away from the real conspiracy she had uncovered. The letter detailed the specific steps Kate had taken to ensure her own safety after disappearing. She had secured a safe location where she could remain hidden while monitoring the situation and communicating with her network of allies. She had arranged for financial resources that would allow her to remain independent without leaving traces that could be followed by her surveillance team. Most importantly, she had established deadlines and contingencies that would trigger the release of information if she failed to check in regularly with her contacts. If something happens to me, the evidence will automatically be released to multiple news organizations and government agencies, Kate wrote. I have ensured that the truth will come out regardless of what they do to try to stop it. This letter to you is just the first step in a process that will ultimately expose everything they have done and everyone who has participated in betraying the trust of the British people. Kate explained that she had chosen to contact Charles first because she believed he was genuinely committed to the integrity of the monarchy and had the authority to take decisive action. She provided him with specific instructions for how to safely access the evidence she had compiled and how to verify its authenticity without alerting the conspirators to his knowledge. You will need to be extremely careful about whom you trust, Kate warned. Some of the people who appear most loyal and helpful may actually be working against the Crown's true interests. I have prepared a list of individuals who I believe can be trusted, but even with them, you should verify everything independently before taking action. The letter included detailed protocols for how Charles should handle the evidence, including recommendations for which law enforcement agencies and government officials could be trusted with the information. Kate had clearly thought through every aspect of how the conspiracy could be exposed while minimizing damage to the monarchy itself and ensuring the safety of everyone involved in bringing the truth to light. As Charles finished reading the second page, he realized that Kate had essentially handed him a roadmap for dismantling a corruption network that had been operating within the royal establishment for over a decade. The scope of her investigation and the thoroughness of her planning were breathtaking, but so was the magnitude of the task she was asking him to undertake. The names mentioned in her letter included people Charles saw regularly, individuals who had shared meals with the royal family, and had been trusted with some of the Crown's most sensitive responsibilities. The thought that these same people had been systematically stealing from charities and manipulating royal decisions for their own benefit filled him with a rage that was tempered only by his growing admiration for Kate's courage and intelligence. Charles looked at the remaining pages of the letter, knowing that each one would likely contain revelations that would be even more difficult to process. Kate had already exposed financial corruption, political manipulation, and systematic surveillance within the royal establishment. What other secrets had she uncovered that were serious enough to risk her life and family to bring to light? The afternoon was growing late, but Charles knew he could not rest until he had read every word Kate had written and understood the full scope of what she was asking him to do. The third page of Kate's letter began with an apology that made Charles's chest tighten with emotion. Her careful handwriting conveyed a deep sadness as she acknowledged the pain her disappearance would cause William and their children, but also her unwavering belief that the sacrifices were necessary to protect the institution they all served. I know William will blame himself for not protecting me, Kate wrote. He will search through our recent conversations, looking for signs he missed, warnings he failed to recognize. Please help him understand that there was nothing he could have done differently. This situation existed long before either of us realized the danger, and my choice to disappear was made to protect him as much as to expose the truth. Kate's concern for her husband's emotional state was evident throughout this section of the letter. She described how she had deliberately kept him unaware of her investigation, not because she didn't trust him, but because she knew his natural instinct would be to confront the problem directly. William's straightforward approach to challenges, while admirable in most circumstances, would have been catastrophic when dealing with people who had already demonstrated their willingness to use surveillance and intimidation to protect their secrets. William's honesty and integrity are his greatest strengths, but they would have made him vulnerable to manipulation by these people, Kate explained. They would have used his love for me and his desire to protect our family as weapons against him. By keeping him ignorant of what I discovered, I ensured that he could not be compromised or used to threaten me into silence. The letter revealed that Kate had spent considerable time observing the people around William, documenting who had access to information about his schedule, his concerns, and his private conversations. She had discovered that even some of his closest advisors were part of the surveillance network, reporting details about the prince's state of mind and activities to the same people who were orchestrating the financial corruption. They had been using William's trust and goodwill against the royal family for years, Kate wrote. Information he shared in confidence about family concerns, policy preferences, and personal relationships was being passed along to people who used it to manipulate decisions and maintain their control over royal activities. William never suspected that his attempts to be open and collaborative with his staff were actually providing ammunition to those working against the crown's interests. Kate described specific instances where William's private thoughts and concerns had been twisted and used against him. When he expressed doubts about certain charitable partnerships, those doubts were reported to the corrupt network, which then made sure the partnerships continued by providing misleading information that addressed his concerns without actually resolving the underlying problems. When he showed interest in particular social causes, the network ensured that his support was directed toward organizations they controlled rather than more effective alternatives. The systematic manipulation of William's good intentions had been particularly painful for Kate to witness because she could see how it affected his confidence in his own judgment. William had begun to second-guess himself on decisions where he had initially shown good instincts, not realizing that the information he was receiving had been carefully filtered to serve someone else's agenda rather than the public good. I watched my husband become increasingly frustrated with his inability to make the impact he desired, Kate wrote. He could see that problems persisted despite royal attention and resources being directed toward them, but he didn't understand that the solutions were being sabotaged by the very people who were supposed to be helping him implement them. Kate's letter went on to detail the personal toll that her investigation had taken on her relationship with William. She had been forced to become secretive and distant, creating emotional barriers that confused and hurt him. She had to deflect his questions about her mood and activities, knowing that any honest explanation would put him in danger. The guilt of deceiving someone she loved while trying to protect him had been one of the most difficult aspects of her entire ordeal. There were nights when I lay awake watching William sleep, knowing that I was keeping secrets that could destroy our marriage if he discovered them, but also knowing that revealing those secrets could destroy much more, Kate confessed. I chose to bear the burden alone rather than risk his safety or compromise his ability to serve the crown effectively. The letter described how Kate had arranged her investigation to minimize the risk to other family members as well. She had been careful never to access sensitive information from locations or devices that could be traced back to other royals. She had avoided involving palace staff who worked closely with Charles, William, or other family members, knowing that their participation could make those individuals targets for retaliation. Kate revealed that she had received direct threats once her investigation began to uncover the most sensitive information. Anonymous messages had been delivered to secure locations, making it clear that her activities were being monitored and that there would be consequences if she continued. The threats were never specific enough to constitute criminal activity, but they were clear enough to communicate that her family's safety depended on her silence. They sent me photographs of our children at school, images taken from angles that showed how close they could get without being detected by security, Kate wrote, her handwriting showing the stress of recalling these moments. They never said anything explicitly threatening, but the message was unmistakable. My investigation was not just putting me at risk, it was endangering George, Charlotte, and Louis. The realization that her children were being used as leverage against her had nearly convinced Kate to abandon her investigation entirely. For several weeks, she had stopped her research and tried to convince herself that the corruption she had discovered was not worth the risk to her family's safety. But the more she thought about the systematic theft from children's charities and educational programs, the more she realized that her own children's futures were also at stake. I understood that if I allowed this corruption to continue unchallenged, I would be condemning not just other people's children to suffer from underfunded programs and diverted resources, but potentially my own children as well, Kate explained. The monarchy they will inherit will be weakened and compromised if these problems are not addressed. My temporary silence might protect them in the short term, but my permanent silence would leave them with a damaged institution that could not effectively serve the British people. Kate's decision to proceed with her investigation, despite the threats to her family, had required her to develop an entirely new approach to her royal duties and personal life. She had arranged for additional security measures for her children that appeared to be routine protocol adjustments, but actually provided protection against surveillance and potential kidnapping attempts. She had established alternative communication methods with their schools and caregivers that bypassed normal palace channels. I created contingency plans for every possible scenario, Kate wrote. If the threats escalated, if I was arrested on false charges, if I simply disappeared one day, there were protocols in place to ensure that the children would be protected and that the evidence I had gathered would still reach the right people. The letter revealed that Kate's disappearance had been triggered by a specific incident that convinced her that the situation had become immediately dangerous. She had discovered that the corrupt network was planning to frame her for financial impropriety using fabricated evidence that would destroy her reputation and discredit any allegations she might make against them. The frame-up would have been sophisticated enough to convince even people who knew her well that she had been involved in questionable financial dealings. They were going to make it appear that I had been using my position to benefit personal investments and charitable causes connected to my family, Kate explained. The evidence they planned to present would have been convincing because it was based on real transactions that they had manipulated through their control of financial systems and record-keeping. Even you and William would have found it difficult to defend me against accusations supported by what appeared to be documentary proof. Kate had learned about the frame-up through one of her trusted contacts who had been approached about participating in the scheme. This person had pretended to go along with the plan while secretly recording conversations and gathering evidence about how the false accusations were being constructed. The information revealed that Kate had very little time before the accusations would be made public, giving her only days to disappear and implement her contingency plans. I realized that once the false accusations were made public, I would lose all credibility and the real evidence I'd gathered would be dismissed as the desperate lies of someone trying to deflect attention from their own crimes, Kate wrote. My disappearance was the only way to prevent this outcome and preserve the possibility that the truth would eventually be revealed. Kate's letter included detailed instructions for how Charles could verify the authenticity of the evidence she had gathered and distinguish it from any false information that might be presented in attempts to discredit her. She had anticipated that the corrupt network would try to fight back by creating their own version of events, and she had prepared documentation that would allow Charles to identify which materials were genuine and which were fabricated. They will try to convince you that I was mentally unstable, that I had become paranoid and delusional, Kate warned. They may present evidence that appears to support this theory, including recordings of conversations taken out of context and witness statements from people who were coerced or manipulated into providing false testimony. You must be prepared to look beyond the surface and examine the underlying facts independently. The third page of the letter concluded with Kate's most specific instructions yet for how Charles should proceed. She provided him with contact information for the trusted individuals who could help him verify her evidence and begin the process of exposing the corruption. She outlined a timeline for action that would maximize the chances of success while minimizing the risks to all involved. Time is critical now, Kate emphasized. The longer the corrupt network has to prepare their response to my disappearance, the more difficult it will become to prove what they have done. They will use every day to cover their tracks, destroy evidence, and silence potential witnesses. If you're going to act on the information I have provided, it must be done quickly and decisively. As Charles finished reading the third page, he felt the weight of enormous responsibility settling on his shoulders. Kate had not only uncovered a massive conspiracy against the crown, she had also sacrificed her own safety and happiness to provide him with the tools needed to address it. The question now was whether he had the courage and wisdom to use those tools effectively, knowing that the wrong move could endanger Kate's life, destroy his family's reputation, and potentially destabilize the monarchy itself. The final page of the letter awaited him, and Charles suspected it would contain Kate's most crucial revelations and her final request for what she needed him to do. The afternoon was fading into evening, but Charles knew that the real work was just beginning. Kate had given him a map to navigate the treacherous waters ahead, but it would be up to him to chart the course that would lead to justice while preserving everything they all held dear. The final page of Kate's letter began with words that would forever be etched in Charles's memory. Your Majesty, what I am about to reveal will challenge everything you believe about the people closest to you. But it is information you must have if the monarchy is to survive with its integrity intact. Charles's hands trembled slightly as he read Kate's account of the most devastating discovery she had made during her investigation. The corruption network she had uncovered was not merely a group of opportunistic individuals taking advantage of royal resources. It was part of a much larger conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and included foreign entities that sought to manipulate British policy through their influence over the royal family. The financial corruption was only the beginning, Kate wrote. The same people who were stealing from royal charities were also selling information about royal activities, government policies, and state secrets to foreign intelligence services. They have turned their positions of trust within the royal household into a pipeline for espionage that threatens national security. Kate detailed how she had discovered encrypted communications between members of the corrupt network and handlers from at least 3 different foreign intelligence agencies. The communications revealed that royal schedules, private conversations between family members and government officials, and advanced knowledge of policy decisions were all being sold to the highest bidders. Foreign governments were using this information to anticipate British government actions and position themselves advantageously in diplomatic and economic negotiations. They have been using their access to you and other family members to gather intelligence that gives foreign powers significant advantages over Britain in international affairs, Kate explained. Conversations you believed were private, including discussions about government policy and personal opinions about world leaders, have been recorded and transmitted to people who use that information against British interests. The scope of the intelligence operation was breathtaking in its audacity. Kate had discovered that listening devices had been placed throughout royal residences, not just for surveillance purposes, but specifically to capture conversations that might contain valuable state secrets. The technology was sophisticated enough to be nearly undetectable and had likely been in place for years without anyone realizing the extent of the surveillance. Kate's investigation had revealed that the foreign intelligence operation was coordinated by someone within the royal household itself, someone with the highest level of security clearance and intimate knowledge of royal protocols. This person had been systematically compromising the security of royal communications and activities while maintaining the appearance of loyal service to the crown. The betrayal runs deeper than you can imagine, Kate wrote. Someone you trust completely, someone who has access to your most private thoughts and plans, has been working as a foreign agent for years. They have used their position not just to steal money, but to gather intelligence that has been used to harm British interests around the world. Kate provided specific examples of how the intelligence gathered through royal surveillance had been used against Britain. Trade negotiations have been compromised when foreign governments knew in advance what concessions Britain was prepared to make. Diplomatic initiatives had been undermined when other countries anticipated British positions and prepared counter-strategies. Military operations have been put at risk when classified information discussed in royal meetings have been leaked to hostile forces. The damage to British national security has been immense, Kate explained. Our enemies have known our strategies before we implemented them. Our allies have lost trust in our ability to keep secrets, and Our economic interests have suffered because other countries knew how to exploit our negotiating positions. Kate's letter revealed that she had gathered irrefutable proof of these intelligence activities, including recordings of the encrypted communications and documentation of payments made to the royal household spy by foreign intelligence agencies. She had also identified the sophisticated methods used to conceal the espionage activities, making it appear that security breaches originated from other sources within the government rather than from within the royal family itself. The foreign intelligence operation had been particularly insidious because it exploited the trust and informal nature of royal family relationships. Family dinners were a sensitive topic for discussed, private meetings between royals and government officials, and even casual conversations during public events had all been monitored and analyzed for intelligence value. The perpetrators had turned the royal family's natural openness and collaborative approach to their duties into a weapon against their own country. They have made you all unwitting participants in the betrayal of Britain, Kate wrote. Every time you shared your thoughts about government policy, every time you discussed your concerns about international affairs, every time you expressed personal opinions about world leaders, you were providing ammunition that was used to undermine your own government's effectiveness. Kate explained that discovering the full extent of the intelligence operation had been the final factor that convinced her to risk everything to expose the conspiracy. The financial corruption, while serious, primarily affected specific charities and programs. But the espionage activities threatened the fundamental security of the nation and could have consequences that lasted for generations. I cannot remain silent knowing that foreign governments were using their influence over royal activities to harm British interests, Kate wrote. The monarchy exists to serve Britain and its people, not to provide intelligence advantages to our competitors and enemies. If this betrayal is not exposed and stopped, it will ultimately destroy the institution from within. Kate's letter included detailed instructions for how Charles could safely contact the appropriate intelligence and law enforcement agencies to report what she had discovered. She emphasized the importance of bypassing normal palace security channels, since some of those channels have been compromised by the same people who were conducting the espionage activities. You must assume that everything you do within the normal palace environment is being monitored and reported, Kate warned. The people who are supposed to protect you have been recording your activities and sharing that information with foreign intelligence agencies. Any investigation must be conducted through completely independent channels that have no connection to current royal household staff or security personnel. Kate provided Charles with specific contact information for intelligence officials and law enforcement officers whom she had verified were not compromised by the conspiracy. She had spent considerable time and effort identifying people who could be trusted with such sensitive information and who had the authority and resources needed to act on it effectively. The letter also addressed the question of Kate's own safety and future plans. She revealed that she was in a secure location where she could monitor the situation and provide additional assistance as needed, but that her continued safety depended on the conspiracy being exposed quickly and thoroughly. The longer she remained hidden, the greater the risk that her location would be discovered by people who wanted to silence her permanently. I am safe for now, but my situation is precarious, Kate admitted. The people I am hiding from have extensive resources and connections that make it difficult to remain concealed indefinitely. Once you begin to act on the information I have provided, they will realize that their activities have been discovered and will likely intensify their efforts to find me. Kate explained that she had prepared for multiple scenarios, including the possibility that she might not survive to see the conspiracy fully exposed. She had arranged for additional evidence to be released automatically if she failed to check in with her contacts according to predetermined schedules. She had also provided detailed testimony to trusted individuals who could speak on her behalf if she was unable to testify personally. If something happens to me before this matter is resolved, please know that I did this willingly and with full knowledge of the risks involved, Kate wrote. I chose to sacrifice my own safety and happiness to protect the institution we all serve and the country we all love. I do not regret that choice, and I hope you will honor it by ensuring that the truth is revealed and justice is served. Kate's final paragraphs were addressed directly to Charles as both her king and the grandfather of her children. She asked him to help William understand her choices and to ensure that George, Charlotte, and Louis grew up knowing that their mother had acted from love rather than abandoning them from selfishness or despair. Please help our children understand that I disappeared not because I did not love them, but because I love them enough to risk everything to preserve the institution they will one day inherit, Kate pleaded. I want them to grow up knowing that the monarchy stands for integrity, service, and truth, not corruption, betrayal, and for manipulation. Kate concluded her letter with a request that Charles consider carefully before deciding how to proceed. She acknowledged that exposing the conspiracy would create enormous challenges for the royal family and might damage public confidence in the monarchy temporarily. But she argued that the long-term health of the institution depended on addressing these problems honestly rather than allowing them to continue festering in secret. The British people deserve to know when their trust has been betrayed, and they deserve to see that betrayal addressed with courage and determination, Kate wrote. If we handle this crisis with honesty and transparency, the monarchy will emerge stronger and more trusted than ever before. If we attempt to cover it up or minimize its significance, we risk losing the public confidence that is essential to our continued existence. The letter ended with Kate's signature and a final message that brought tears to Charles's eyes. I remain, now and always, your devoted daughter-in-law and servant of the crown. May God save the king, and may God preserve the integrity of the institution we all cherish. Charles set down the letter and sat in silence as the full weight of Kate's revelations settled upon him. She had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened not just the royal family, but the security of the entire nation. She had sacrificed her own safety and happiness to provide him with the tools needed to address that threat. Now, it was up to him to decide whether he had the courage to use those tools, knowing that the consequences of action would be severe, but the consequences of inaction could be catastrophic. The evening shadows were lengthening across his study, but Charles knew that his real work was just beginning. Kate had given him a roadmap for exposing corruption and espionage at the highest levels of government and the royal household. Following that roadmap would require courage, wisdom, and careful planning. But Charles understood that he had no choice. The oath he had taken as king required him to protect Britain and its people, even if doing so meant confronting people he had trusted and creating challenges he had never anticipated. As Charles began to plan his next steps, he thought about Kate hiding somewhere, waiting to learn whether her sacrifices had been worthwhile. He thought about William, still searching desperately for his missing wife without knowing that she had disappeared voluntarily to protect everything they held dear. Most of all, he thought about his duty as king and his responsibility to ensure that the monarchy continued to serve the British people with integrity and honor. Kate's letter had changed everything, but it had also provided him with the opportunity to save an institution that had been under attack from within for years. The path ahead would be difficult and dangerous, but Charles knew that he owed it to Kate, to his family, and to his country to follow that path wherever it might lead. The future of the monarchy, and perhaps the security of the nation itself, depended on the decisions he made in the hours and days to come.